Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. When we get started, we're going to be starting with chapter 26. Or at the beginning of chapter 26 of Isaiah. Non-introduction, introduction. The introduction to Isaiah is on the first lecture on Isaiah that's on the website, if you want to listen to it again. Before we start, I wasn't watching the History Channel this week. It's not my fault. I wasn't trying to watch any of this stuff. Now I'm getting commercials for this stuff on YouTube. When I'm trying to watch, funny cat videos. And here they show me commercials. And now, the new one, I don't know if anyone's heard of this yet, but from the producers of the Bible miniseries, remember how much I enjoyed that, comes a new series. It's going to be starting this Easter called AD, the series. And so the first episode, I'm going here by the extended 5-minute trailer they keep showing me on YouTube videos. The first episode has Christ's death and resurrection. And then the idea is that then going forward, that's the pilot. And then going forward, it's following St. Peter and the Theotokos, right? Their life after that. Now that could be interesting. However,
I knew there was a however.
First of all, it appears to bear no resemblance whatsoever to the book of Acts.
Right.
Second, already in the trailer, I'm seeing a whole bunch of these fallacies that we've talked about a little in here already. For example, we're going to talk about this where we get the New Testament, but right off the bat, you've got the Romans, the bad guys. You've got the Romans. You've got the Jewish priests, who are our two bad guy groups. Looks like a lot of soap opera, frankly. But who are out to stop this new cult. This new cult. Well, first of all, as we're going to see, as we've already seen in the Old Testament, but as we're going to see when we get into the New Testament, Christianity was not a new religion.
No, it was Judaism.
It was not a new religion. Okay? It was an interpretation of Judaism. Right? It was a mode of Judaism. And at that time in history, in the first century, there were dozens, right, of different types of Judaism, as they allude to, right? They've got zealots, they've got all kinds of, I think they're throwing some Game of Thrones in there, I don't know what else. Intrigue and backstabbing. But also related to that, they're already separate from, the Jewish priests are all out to get, all the Christians. Right, because it's already a separate religion. But whenever they show the Christians, for example, gathering to worship, guess what it looks like?
Looks like a home church. An evangelical home church.
It's a whole bunch of people in a big room with nothing on the walls.
There you go.
Right. They all get together, they sing some songs.
There you go.
Right. And then somebody preaches. Right. It's like... Right? And I'm looking at it going, yeah, right? Now the real irony of this is that this view of the church and of church history isn't even really rightly Protestant. And Martin Luther and John Calvin didn't have that view of church history, right? They understood, for example, that there were bishops going all the way back to the beginning. Right? They understood, they took them for granted. This comes out of the 19th century.
This is frontier revival.
Well, it comes right, but intellectually, it comes out of 19th century German theology, right? Which was influenced by a fellow named Hegel. Basically, without trying to explain Hegel takes the theory of evolution and applies it to everything. Right? So everything in the world starts out simple. and gets more and more complex, right? So everything starts out small, gets bigger. Everything starts out simple, gets complex, right? And therefore, we have this assumption, well, the church now is pretty complex. But back when it was starting, when it was a new religion, which it wasn't, it must have just been simple, right? And not only that, but that simple is somehow better, right? If we can only get back to just a few of us standing together in a room, right? You know, and get past all this other stuff that's been added on. Right? Well, the problem is twofold. Number one, as we've seen, this stuff isn't added on. This stuff goes all the way back into the Old Testament, right? None of this is new, right? None of the things we do in Orthodox churches are new. They go all the way back into, you know, in most cases, all the way back to Moses. Or at least all the way back to David and Solomon's time. Right? If not all the way back to Moses. But the idea that these things evolve, these are the same people. These are the same people who have a cow about the theory of evolution being in science books. Right? So I'm going, you don't believe, right? You don't believe in the theory of evolution, except when it comes to church, right? Except when it comes to religion, except when it comes to God, that now all of a sudden you believe in it, right? It makes no sense. So anyway, I don't recommend this this series. It's based on a lot of bad presuppositions, and I have a feeling what we're going to see is they're going to try and turn like St. Peter into an action hero. You know, and there's going to be all this, you know, you know, the book of Acts, which we're going to read here in a couple of years, and talk about, it's pretty exciting unto itself, right? There's shipwrecks, there's escapes by night,
Out of prison.
there's floggings, there's prison breaks, right? There's miracles. There's a lot of cool stuff. You don't really need to make things up, right? You can kind of go with the real story.
Handle stress.
Yeah, people,
That's what they got to handle.
yeah, yeah.
That's what I brought up.
St. Paul with the snake, yeah. There's lots of great stuff. You just go with that, right? Or do a series about the early Christians in the Roman Empire that talks about like the martyrs, you know, that people don't know about, right? Why go to something that's in the Bible and then make things up? I don't get it.
My question is this. When Christians and the Jews actually split from Christians,
Which is about 110 AD.
After the fall of the temples.
110 AD is when it happened.
Oh, is that one in the state?
The rabbis met and expelled Christians from the synagogues.
Yes, no more meetings. So the Christians who were expelled, are you saying that there was a duality here to the temple? Christians worship with robes and ceremony, as the rabbis did? Because if you were expelled, okay, you would not have the liturgy, which our liturgy, has it not evolved a little bit? We use
No.
no. Well, that's
Yeah.
all right. I'm just you can.
No, that's okay. There's. See, what happens is we've seen already, right? Obviously, the temple,
Yes.
right? And the temple was there for how long?
Well,
The first one,
The first one,
about 400 years,
yes, and then the second.
give or take. About 400 years, give or take. Rest of Israel's history, no temple. The second temple we'll talk about more as we go, obviously. But while there was the temple, before that the tabernacle, that was the only place where you could sacrifice, right? Okay. So the central act of worship, as we've seen, the sacrifices, when you read in the Pentateuch, first 5 books, we read through Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, almost everything about worship is having to do with sacrifice, right? So that central piece of worship is confined to one place. Well, what happens is you get Jews, especially once the exile happens, right? The Syrians come in and destroy the northern kingdom. The Jews go into exile. You end up with Jews in Egypt, Jews in Babylon, Jews in Palestine, right? Those Jews in other places still want to worship God, and that's how the synagogues are created. Synagogue just means gathering place, right? A place where you gather together. And so they gather together in the synagogues, right? And they gather together. They sing psalms. They have readings from the Torah, and then from the prophets, from the law and the prophets, and then they would have preaching. Okay? The first half of our divine liturgy, right? It's called the liturgy of the Word, right? Up to the homily, is exactly what they did in Christian synagogues in the 1st century A.D. In fact, if you go to an Orthodox synagogue today for one of their Sabbath services, and you look at the structure of the service, it's the exact same structure as the first half of our liturgy. Just they have a procession with the Torah scroll, we have a procession with the gospel book. Right? It's adapted because it's Christian, right? But it's the same liturgics. Right? It's the same liturgics. And so previous to the expulsion from the synagogues, right? There were certain synagogues that were Christian synagogues. Okay? And so
Jewish too.
and we're continuing to function on Saturdays. Right? They're continuing to function on Saturdays and doing that part of the service. Right? Then on Sundays, right? Christians would have a separate meeting, right? Just the Christians. Right? Just the baptized Christians would have a separate meeting on the first day of the week on Sunday to commemorate the resurrection. That's the second half of our service that surrounds the Eucharist. All those liturgics are taken from the temple. That's the sacrificial rituals from the temple brought over and Christianized in the same way. So that when the Christians were expelled from the synagogues, they just took that piece that was the synagogue service and attached it to the front of the Eucharistic service and did both on Sundays.
Well, the Episcopal Church, if I recall, theirs is a little bit about the same, the Old Testament and New.
Yeah, if you look at the ancient Western liturgies, they're all the same structure.
Yes.
They're all the same structure as ours. In fact, they have a lot of the same elements. So virtually, yeah. They have all the same elements. Not the identical words, but they have the same pieces. All the same pieces are there.
Like the stone missile?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all the same pieces because that's where it came from.
Would you say that the Book of Common Prayer, the Church of England has any elements aspect?
The old one does, the one that non-jurists used in the 18th century, 1736. Non-jurist Book of Common Prayer was actually approved for use in Orthodox churches by the Holy Synod of Moscow in the 18th century. But anyway, that's much later. But yeah, the actual detailed liturgics of the service that we're doing are what was done in the synagogue and in the temple in the 1st century, but in Christian form. So we're offering the bread and wine, receiving the body of Christ. We're not offering an animal. Right? But the process we take with that bread and that wine is essentially the same process that they went through with the animal. Yeah.
Okay. When the faith begins to move into other nations, okay, you break into something like the culture of that nation. Okay? And I've seen minor evolution in the worship service of America. My family never in 1,000 years would they ever think that there would be Sunday services on TV and you could sit there and not go to church. I mean, just not, well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's part of the change, okay, that's coming about. I see it in the school systems, the curriculum, okay? That change, would that not also have its influence upon Christendom, far and wide? Such as the Episcopal Prayer Book, as I look at it from, that was published, that talked about the books of wisdom, that we don't need these books and so forth.
Well, yeah, the basic problem with those changes in worship is that one of the basic principles of Christian worship is lex orandi est lex credendi, meaning the word prayed is the word believed. Meaning I can have written down somewhere in some book somewhere anything I want about what the church believes, right? But what the actual people who are there worshiping are going to believe is what they're saying in their prayers, right? What they're singing in their services, right? And so if those two things don't match, we got a problem, right? If we're supposed to believe one thing and we're going out and we're singing and praying something different, right, then we've got a problem. And so you find, especially in America lately, because worship is taken as being a reflection of nothing but our own creativity.
Yes.
And our own self-expression, right? You'll find basically the same worship in churches that claim to believe totally different things. And so, essentially, the worship that we've preserved the way we've preserved it because we're trying to preserve the true faith, right? Which actually has the power to save people. That's why it's important. Right? Because fake versions don't have the power to save anybody. And if you're not saving anybody, then what's the point? Right? Stay home, watch football in your underpants. Right? It's important that those two match up. And so that's why what you see in the church life in the United States is accompanying that degradation of worship. And just whatever we want to do is a degradation of commonly held morality, degradation of the faith, of belief. I had given to me by an elderly, when I was a Dutch Reform pastor, an elderly Dutch Reform woman, she collected all these bulletins from her church in Kalamazoo, Michigan in the 1920s. And on the back page, they had this theology corner, okay, where they're explaining things like supralapsarianism and infralapsarianism. I won't explain what those are. But that gives you these sort of abstruse theological concepts, okay? These weren't college-educated people reading this book. These were Dutch dairy farmers. A lot of them fresh off the boat. Okay? But when they came to church and read the back of their bulletin, and went to Sunday school, participating in church life, right? They were talking about their faith at a level that far surpasses, what goes on just about anywhere in the U.S. today. And a lot of that is because of their worship, right? Because the hymns, the sermons, we're all aimed at educating them. We're all aimed at promoting what their beliefs were. I have a problem with some of those beliefs, but at least, the people who go in there knew what they believed. They could explain it to you. They could even have a pretty good argument with you, to defend it. I don't think the average person in any church, and I would have to unfortunately include a lot of our Orthodox folk, could do that today. Because you would really explain what they believe on a given topic and argue for it and against a fake version. Now we're working on it, and a lot of folks want to be able to do that, but there's a story from the Carpatho Russian. Back in the back in the 18th century, they tried to import a bunch of Jesuits to try to convert, the area from Orthodoxy to Roman Catholicism. And the Jesuits, after about 10 years, ended up disbanding the mission because they hadn't gotten a single convert. Because they were going to these peasants, right, and trying to convert them to Roman Catholicism. And all these peasants, because of the congregational singing, the Carpatho worship tradition, because they all did congregational singing, they knew all the Troparia, all the hymns of the church, the verses from Vespers, the verses from Matins, and so they could argue with these Jesuits, even though they'd never been to school a day in their lives, right? Because their worship had taught them all these things about the faith.
And I understand what you're saying, but I'm very blessed in knowing some other churches that the people can respond just because they know their Bible so well. First, it's almost like having a photographic mind. And one, back in West Virginia, the Church of God, there's a couple of other smaller churches, but I look over and I'm just amazed sitting there in their perspective of Scripture.
But I bet you those churches also probably have a more traditional, for them, form of worship too.
They do the washing of the feet. It's not.
I bet their tradition, obviously.
Yeah.
But I would bet you that they're also, and that's part of why their people are so important in their tradition.
Just things like that. Like, I don't think that one needs to be well educated to understand the Word of God, because I don't think God wrote His Word like that.
Right. No, but worship, right, is something that we all do.
Yeah.
Right? And that can get us there, whether we have the book learning or not. Right? Because we can come to know God. And if you know God well enough, then it doesn't matter what fake somebody comes to you with, you know the real one. You can say, no, that's not. Right? That's not right. So all that said, sorry, but I had to watch that same commercial about 8 times in the last 3 days every time I went on YouTube. I don't know why they're hitting me with it.
Are you going to watch that series so you can review it?
No, I'm going to try to avoid it as much as possible so you don't get a weekly dose of what I just me nitpicking.
We're just developing also.
Yeah, maybe I'll start a podcast just where I critique each episode or something. I don't know. People who really want to hear it can tune in.
5 minutes on each one of the lectures.
So, okay, let's get started in chapter 26 in Isaiah. Less of me, more of Isaiah. We're coming off of, right? What we've been reading were the oracles against the nations, they're usually called. And I talked a little bit, and I think we've seen why that's not a really good title for them. Not just because oracle is a technical term, but I would question whether they're really against the nations, right? Because we saw, even in cases like Moab and Assyria and Babylon, God was promising His Messiah to them the same way He was to Judah and to Israel, right? And was talking about restoring a remnant of their people. It was talking about them coming to the true faith. How there would be altars in Egypt. Right? So I think the against part is kind of wrong too. And even probably the nations part, because the nations means Gentiles, and we saw Judah was included right there with them. And God denounced the sinfulness in Judah the same way He denounced the sinfulness everywhere else. Right? He said they would be judged the same way. Okay. So now, chapter 26, it starts out, in that day. What day are we talking about? We're talking about the day when this judgment and purification happens, right, to the whole world. Remember, a couple chapters ago it started, God is going to shake the whole earth, right? That He was going to bring judgment on the whole earth. So chapter 26, verse 1, in that day they shall sing this song in the land of Judah. Behold, we have a strong city. He will make our salvation its surrounding wall. Open the gates, let the people enter who keep righteousness and guard the truth, and who lay hold of the truth and keep peace, because they hope forever in you, O Lord, the great and eternal God. who humbles and brings down those who dwell on high. The strong cities you will cast down, you will bring them down to the ground. The feet of the gentle and the humble shall tread them underfoot. The way of the godly is straight, and the way of the godly is prepared. For the way of the Lord is judgment. We hope in your name and in the remembrance of you, which our soul desires in the night. My spirit rises early in the morning to you, O God, for your commands are a light upon the earth. Learn righteousness, you who dwell upon the earth. The ungodly man ceases. He will not learn righteousness on the earth. He will not do the truth. Let the ungodly man be taken away, that he may not see the glory of the Lord. Let me pause there. We're in the midst of, you might have noticed a couple of verses there from Bridegroom Matins. There's going to be a couple more coming up in Holy Week that we use as antiphons in the services of Bridegroom Matins. But at the beginning, right, Judah, the land of Judah, they're going to say, "Behold, we have a strong city." What city is that? So you notice he doesn't say Jerusalem, because he's trying to make clear that the city he's talking about isn't the physical city of Jerusalem, right? It's Jerusalem in the prophetic sense, right? It's the new Jerusalem that St. John is going to see coming down out of heaven, right? In that day when judgment is coming upon the earth. Judgment is coming upon the earth, right? Then Judah, then God's people are going to say, "We have a strong city." Right? And our salvation is its walls. We're being protected by God's salvation from this judgment that's coming upon the earth. And you see this theme again that, of course, Jesus is going to speak of over and over again. Right? He topples the strong cities, and then the humble and meek walk over them. Right? And the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. That Jesus keeps saying over and over and over and over again in his ministry. Verse 11, "O Lord, your arm is exalted, but they did not know it. But when they know it, they shall be ashamed. For jealousy will seize an untaught people, and now fire will devour the adversaries." There's a couple more verses that are that we use as antiphons. But notice, "O Lord, your arm is exalted, but they did not know it." Remember, we talked about this raising of the arm being one of those symbols of judgment. Right? And this is saying judgment is coming. Right? Judgment is coming upon his people, but they don't realize it. And Jesus is going to refer to this. He talks about, you look at the sky and you see, you predict the weather. Right? Red sky at night, sailor's delight. Right? You go and you look and you make all these predictions. He says, but you can't see what's going on spiritually right now. You can't see the judgment that's about to come upon you. You're blind to it. But when they know it, they shall be ashamed, for jealousy will seize an untaught people. What's that referring to? Well, by the time they realize they're being judged, right? By the time Jewish people realize that they're being judged, right? And untaught people, another people, right, is going to be coming to God. Hence the jealousy. Hence the jealousy. So this is predicting exactly what St. Paul saw happening, that he talks about in Romans chapter 9. The people put Christ to death. Even after putting Christ to death and after his resurrection, they don't see what they did. They don't understand what time it is. They don't understand that this is the critical moment, right, for their people. And so judgment comes upon them, hits them in 70 AD. Pretty square in the face, right? And by the time they realize that judgment, that they're under God's judgment, what's happened? St. Paul's already brought the gospel to most of the known world. Right? And Gentiles are flooding in to worship the God who they put to death, who they rejected. Right? So this is Isaiah predicting, or essentially that this is the pattern. This is what's going to happen. Verse 12, O Lord our God, grant us peace, for you render everything to us. O Lord our God, possess us. O Lord, we know no other besides you. We name your name. The dead will not see life, neither will physicians raise them. Therefore you brought evils upon them and destroyed them and took away every male of theirs. Who is that referring to? That's referring to the Egyptians, right? It's referring back to the Passover. They took every male of theirs. It's referring back to the Passover. See, again, Pharaoh isn't just Pharaoh, right? Historically, he represents someone else. Verse 15, bring more evils on them, O Lord, on the glorious of the earth. And there's the last of the verses that we use in those antiphons, right? Bring more evils upon them who are glorious on them. This is who Pharaoh represents. Pharaoh represents this earthly power of wickedness, right? That's against God, right? So that bring more evils upon them is asking that more plagues, right? That more be done to humble them. That first part, the dead will not see life, neither will physicians raise them. Hold on to that for a second. Because remember, in context here, we're talking about Moses in Egypt. Remember the first couple plagues, Pharaoh trotted out his court magicians, and they kind of quasi-duplicated, right? So yeah, we can do that. We can simulate that. Right? We can do something similar. Well, Passover, right? Every firstborn male dead. They couldn't simulate that, and they couldn't bring any of those dead people back to life. Right. So the city of man, as we've been talking about it, Pharaoh with all his power on this earth, right? Can't raise the dead. Right? Can't raise the dead. Can't do anything about it. Verse 16, O Lord, I remembered you in my hard circumstances. Your chastening to us was a small affliction. As a woman with child is in pain and cries out in her pangs when she draws near the time of her delivery, so we became your beloved because of your fear, O Lord. We have been with child, we have been in pain, and we have given birth. We brought forth the spirit of your salvation on the earth. The inhabitants of the world shall fall. So what's he saying there? He's comparing the suffering and the judgment that's coming upon the Jewish people. Remember, we saw the one comparison was to gold being refined in a fire, right? So that remnant that comes out, right, is pure. Now he's using the example of a woman giving birth to a child, which very painful. I haven't done it, don't know firsthand, but I'm given to understand, very painful, right? Very painful. But what comes out of it is a new life. And he's comparing that to, yes, we were going through this judgment. We're going through this pain and this suffering. But in the end, what's going to come out of that is salvation, not just for the Jewish people, but for the whole world. So remember St. Paul says Christ is salvation to the Jew first, and then to the Gentile. Right? Christ says salvation is of the Jews. Why? Because he's a Jew. Right? That's where he comes first, but ultimately to the whole world. And what's the result of that when Christ comes forth? Verse 19, the dead shall rise up, and those in the tomb shall arise. Those in the earth shall be glad, for your dew is a healing for them, but the land of the ungodly shall come to an end. Okay. So Pharaoh, and those like him, right, including the devil, right, everyone who holds power in this earth can't raise the dead. Right? Power of death is the absolute limit of their power. They all die. Right? They all come to an end. So Christ's power, right, is that he has the power of life and death, and he can raise the dead. Right? So this is the ultimate mark of God's salvation coming, is that the dead will rise. Okay. So in verse 20, come my people, enter your closets and shut your door. Hide yourself for a very short while until the anger of the Lord is past. For behold, the Lord is bringing wrath from his holy place upon the inhabitants of the earth. and the earth will uncover its blood and will not cover its slain. So Isaiah says, another metaphor, go hide yourself, right? Pray, right? Because this judgment is coming and there's going to be this time of suffering, but then afterwards there's going to be this time of joy. These verses, when we get to the end of the book of Matthew, again, a year and a half or so, to the end of the book of Matthew, Matthew has this kind of odd bit that isn't in the other Gospels, that when Christ dies, in addition to the earthquake and the darkness, everything that they all describe, he has the dead coming out of their tombs around Jerusalem. But what makes it odd, you say, well, that's not that, I mean, obviously it's a miracle, but what makes it odd is he says that the dead arise, but they don't come out of their tombs until the third day when Christ rises from the tomb. So the picture you get is that they come back to life and then they just kind of hang out in the tomb. Is it Sunday yet? And then Sunday morning they come out. That's why I say it's kind of a weird picture. Well, it's going back to this. It's going back to this passage. Right? God's salvation has come upon the earth and so the dead have risen. Right? But shut yourself away for a little while until the time of judgment has passed. Right? So he's interpreting this somewhat literally. Right? So he has the dead sort of shut up for a short time before they come forth to help announce the salvation that's come in Christ. So that's what that kind of off picture is in Matthew is connected to, is he's referring you right back to this passage in Isaiah, right? To show you, hey, this wasn't just a neat miracle that these people rose and testified to Jesus. No, this is the fulfillment, right? That this happened is the proof that Christ is the salvation of God that he promised.
I got a question now.
Sure.
You said that the dead were still alive. I mean, they saw the dead. I mean,
In Matthew?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they saw them after
Christ, yeah.
Christ rose.
But Christ had to be the first one because he had death and resurrection. If they would have been the first one, it's been different, wouldn't it?
Right. But the idea there is again going back to this, right? That the dead rise is sort of this display of his power, right? But then they wait until that time of judgment is passed, because the earthquake, the darkness, all those things that were going on during the time of Christ's death, while he was buried, were all the signs that we've seen in the day of the Lord, right? That day of judgment happening. And after the judgment, then comes the glory. So they emerge with Christ on Sunday after the judgment is over. And after that, salvation is coming.
Yeah, Matthew 27.
Matthew
I
27.
looked it up to see if it was literally the way you said.
Yeah. And was it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And many body of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to them.
Yeah.
So when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had happened, they feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. So somehow the centurion managed to see it 2 days ahead.
Well,
I guess
well, he saw the earthquake and the other things. Yeah.
Well, that is how the centurion goes.
Do we know if any of those people went on to become saints or martyrs?
Those people, no. I actually researched that one. This one centurion did. She meant the people who rose. Now, St. Lazarus did, who Christ raised from the dead the week before. He actually became a bishop in Crete. And he died in it eventually. But he was the bishop, one of the first bishops in Crete. So in the early church. Okay, so chapter 27. Now we're going to get another picture. This one's a more mythological picture. In that day God will bring his holy, great, and strong sword upon the fleeing dragon serpent, the perverse dragon serpent that flees, and he shall destroy the dragon. We mentioned all the way back when we talked about Genesis 3. I don't know how many of you were here. You guys were here. A few years ago, we did Genesis 3. Then in the Septuagint, the word that's used for that's translated serpent is actually the word dracon. So literally dragon. Right? And that this is the same, when we get to the book of Revelation here in a couple years, we're going to see that dragon show up again. Right? Draco. But so that's who this dragon is referring to. Now, if you look at like the King James version, it says Leviathan. Right? The Leviathan was a mythical sea creature in Canaanite mythology. It was sort of a sea monster, right? But the idea is in either case, so it represents primordial, meaning from the very beginning evil, right? The most ancient evil there is. So we're talking about Satan, right? We're talking about Satan. Okay, and so part of what's interesting about this is you normally find this kind of thing like in Babylonian mythology and in Canaanite mythology. This is usually in the creation myth, right? This is usually back at the start of the world. So, for example, in Babylonian mythology, you've got two gods, Tiamat and Baphomet, who are the sky and the earth. And they have a son named Marduk. And Marduk comes with a sword and kills his mother Tiamat and cuts her open, and human beings form out of her blood. And so the world is sort of her carcass. All right? Really lovely creation story they've got going. But you find that kind of thing in the creation, right? You find some epic battle between the forces of good and evil, and the good gods win, right? Or in Greek mythology, the battle between the Olympians and the Titans, right? Zeus beats his father, right? Cronus.
That was all the bad guy.
Well, it depends on who you. But so that they all have that battle mythology. Well, here we get this kind of mythological picture of God, of Yahweh slaying Satan. You know, Satan is this big dragon, this big beast, this big sea monster, and we get it as a prophecy, right? So what does that mean? It's prophesied in that day. It means in that day there's going to be a new creation. Right? In that day, we just came off of, whenever things are referred to, this earth, the nations of this earth, the kings of this earth. Right? So this is a very Old Testament way of Isaiah talking about a new earth. Right? A new earth coming into being. And this one isn't going to have him around anymore. Right? He's going to be done away with at the beginning of this new one. Okay? So that this new creation is going to proceed without his interference that we had in Genesis 3 last time. Verse 2, in that day there shall be a beautiful vineyard. Right, remember where we started in Genesis 1? We had a garden. Right? Now we have a new vineyard. And a desire to begin to him against a city. I am a strong city, a besieged city. I water it in vain, for it shall be taken at night, and its walls shall fall by day. There is no woman who has not taken hold of it. Who will appoint me to guard straw in a field? I rejected it because of this enemy. For that very reason, therefore, the Lord God did all the things he ordered. I am burned down. Those who dwell in it will cry out, let us make peace with him, let us make peace. So, this city, right, that's burning down is that city of man from before. Right? It's the cities of this present world. right? They're now being judged and are being burned down. And the people who live in it under that judgment are saying, we need to make peace with, they're finally saying now at the end, we need to make peace with God. Right. Verse 6, those who come are the children of Jacob. Israel shall bud and put forth flowers, and the inhabited earth shall be filled with its fruit. So this is again that remnant, that's going to blossom forth. As he struck, shall he not be thus struck? As he slew, shall he not be thus slain? Fighting and denouncing, he shall send them away. Did you not think with a harsh spirit about killing them in a spirit of anger? Therefore the lawlessness of Jacob will be removed, and this is his blessing when I take away his sin. When they make all the stones of the altars beaten like fine dust, their trees do not remain, and their idols shall be cut down like a distant forest. So notice again the form that salvation takes here. Right? It's not, they will be blessed when I punish someone else for all their sins. Right? And not the few righteous among them will be blessed when I punish all the wicked for their sins. He says, this is my blessing to them, that I will take away their sins. So it's not that they've gotten better, right? It's that God is making them better. God is purifying them. God is purifying them and making them holy, taking their sin away from them. Verse 10, the flock that dwelt there shall be left like an abandoned flock, and for a long time the field will be for pasture, and their flocks shall lie down to rest. After a time there will be nothing green in it because of the withering. Come here, you women who come from that site, for it is a people of no understanding. Therefore he who made them will have no compassion on them, neither he who formed them, and he will show them no mercy. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will close it from the channel of the river to the brook of Egypt. He will gather the sons of Israel one by one. So it shall be in that day that they shall blow the great trumpet, and the lost ones in the country of the Assyrians and in Egypt will come, and they shall worship the Lord on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. So this is, right, again, this picture of the whole flock from the whole world being gathered together. Right? Most of their leaders having been destroyed, right? The judgment coming upon the people who are powerful on this earth. Right? And then the sheep being gathered together to worship the Lord. Chapter 28, woe to the crown of arrogance, the hirelings of Ephraim, the flower that fell from the glory on top of the fertile mountain, those who are drunk without wine. So now we've got kind of a new prophecy beginning here, right? And he's speaking to the crown of Ephraim. So this is the northern kingdom, right? The northern kingdom. Well, but haven't you noticed the pattern in each of these prophecies, right? Each of these prophecies ends up in that same place, right? It ends up in God's salvation. But yeah, it's we have a sort of a number of cycles here. Whereas like in the book of Revelation, we end up in the New Jerusalem, and things are nice and good. We end up here, and then we start all over again because we've got a whole bunch of prophecies put together. And remember what we said about the word woe. It doesn't have the same resonance in English. Right? This is something like cursed are or damned are. Right? The crown of the hirelings of Ephraim. Right? Well, who are the hirelings of Ephraim? In particular, that's referring to the kings. It's referring to the kings. Remember what Jesus says in the Gospel of John when he talks about, it begins with him saying that he is the door. He talks about the difference between a shepherd and a hireling. He says he's a good shepherd because he'll lay down his life for the sheep. Hireling, some guy you hire to take care of your sheep, he's not going to die for your sheep. Right? Wolf comes, he takes off. Right? He's like, I'm not risking my life for some other guy's sheep. Right? And so this is what it's getting at when it's calling the kings of Israel, hirelings. Right? God appointed them to shepherd his people. Right? To be willing to lay down their life for the people. And instead they're behaving like hirelings. They're just there to get rich. Right? They're there to get what they want out of it, take advantage of them. So the hirelings are eating the flower that fell from the glory on top of the fertile mountain, those who are drunk without wine. Behold, the anger of the Lord is a strong and harsh thing, like a falling hail where there is no shelter, falling violently like a great force of water, sweeping away the country. He shall bring relief for the earth with his hands. That line there about bringing relief for the earth, he's saying the wickedness and the evil that's going on there is so bad that it's tainting the earth. He's talking about the rest of creation. Right? I'm going to deliver the ground. I'm going to deliver the tree from you. From the things you're doing on it. The crown of arrogance, the hirelings of Ephraim will be trampled underfoot. But the flower that fell from the hope of the glory on the top of the high mountain shall be like the forerunner of the fig. He who sees it wishes to swallow it before he gets it in his hand. In that day the Lord of hosts shall be the crown of hope, woven of glory to the remnant of my people. They shall be left in a spirit of judgment upon judgment, and for the strength of those who prevent slaying. For these are led astray with wine and are deceived by strong drink. Priest and prophet are out of their minds by reason of wine. They stagger because of drunkenness. They go astray, this is delusion. A curse will devour this counsel, for this counsel was for the sake of covetousness. To whom have we reported evils and declared a message? Those weaned from milk and withdrawn from the breast. Expect affliction upon affliction, hope upon hope, yet a little, yet a little. By reason of the contempt of lips and another tongue they will speak to this people, saying to them, this is the rest for the hungry, and this is the affliction. But they would not listen. The teaching of the Lord God will be for them affliction upon affliction, hope upon hope, yet a little, so they may go and fall backward. They will be in danger, crushed and conquered. Therefore hear the word of the Lord, you afflicted men and rulers of this people in Jerusalem. Because you said, we made a covenant with Hades, and are in agreement with death, and if the rushing storm passes through, it will not come upon us. For we made falsehood our hope, and in falsehood we shall be protected. Let me pause there for a second. So he starts with the northern kingdom. Right? The northern kingdom. And it talks about the judgment and destruction that's coming upon them. Right? Now even their prophets and priests who are supposed to be there to bring God's message. Right? Keep bringing them this hope upon hope. Right? Keep saying, oh no. No, God, no, everything's fine. Right? Everything's fine. Yet a little. Just give it a little time. Right? Give it a little time. Everything will be okay. Right? We're going to see this again in Jeremiah, where he talks about the prophets going around saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Right? So they're out there, instead of bringing the message of God, they're telling everyone everything's all right. It always reminds me of that Baghdad Bob guy. You remember him? When the U.S. troops went into Iraq, and he kept going on the Iraqi news every night and be like, there is no invasion. This is all propaganda, and you hear bombs going off behind him, and because there is nothing happening, Right? That's what these prophets and priests are doing, right? They're like, don't worry, right? Everything's fine. We're God's people. Don't worry, right? So he's saying, now he turns in this last verse and he says, you rulers of Jerusalem, pay attention. It's too late for them. Their judgment's coming. It's too late for them. But now you watch what happens. Because you're in the same boat. You're in the same boat. And look how he describes it. All right? They had a covenant with God. That covenant with God was God did certain things for me, expected certain things in response. Right? He says, you've made a covenant with death. Right? You've made a covenant with death. You've used violence, death, wickedness to get what you want. It's given you certain things. Right? The way you've chosen to live. Right? And you followed through on it. Unlike God's covenant. Right? You've lived exactly the way death expects you to live. Exactly the way wickedness would expect you to live. Right? And in doing so, You made falsehood. You made a lie your hope. Right? And so you think the storm that's coming, that's going to wipe out the northern kingdom, you think it's not going to touch us because we have our hope in this lie. This lie is going to protect us. Right? Verse 16, therefore, thus says the Lord, behold, I lay for the foundations of Zion a costly stone, a chosen and precious cornerstone for its foundations, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. I will also cause judgment to be for hope, and my mercy to be for a standard. The sudden blast of wind will not pass by you who trust vainly in falsehood, except it also take away your covenant of death. Your hope in Hades will also not stand when the rushing storm passes through, for you will be beaten down by it. So, notice what he says. He doesn't say, you're going to get wiped out just like the northern kingdom. What did he say is going to get wiped out? Your covenant with death is going to get wiped out. Your false hope is going to get wiped out. Right? Because I'm going to give you the real. I'm going to give you the real, of course, with no hope on it. This cornerstone, right? It's the first stone you set in the building. He's going to give it to Zion. What does that mean? That means he's building a new Jerusalem, right on that hill. He's going to set the first stone, and that stone is called a hymn. So we know it's talking about Christ. Right? It's talking about Christ being that cornerstone. And so those who trust in that cornerstone, right, in that foundation that God's laying now, right, they're the ones who are going to be protected from the storm. It's connected to that parable Christ tells about the man who built his house on the rock and the man who built his house on the sand. And the storm came through. Right? The one on the firm foundation survives. So this is again that picture of salvation as him taking away that wickedness. Right? The people who are going to suffer are going to be the people who stay dedicated to that wickedness. If you stay dedicated to that wickedness, if you keep hoping in a lie, then yeah, the storm's going to hit you full force. Same thing that happened to the northern kingdom. Right? But I'm going to take that away and I'm going to give you something real to hope in, and if you hope in that, then you have nothing to worry about. Verse 19, when it passes through, it will take you, for morning by morning it will pass through by day, and by night there will be an evil hope. Learn to listen, you in difficult straits. We cannot fight, and we ourselves are too weak to gather ourselves together. As the mountain of the ungodly will rise up and be in the valley of Gibeon, he will do his deeds in anger, a work of bitterness. His anger will behave strangely, and his bitterness will be strange. So do not be glad, neither let your bands become strong, because I heard from the Lord of hosts the things he will perform upon all the earth. Give ear and hear my voice, listen and hear my words. Will the plowman plow all day, or will he prepare the seed before he cultivates the ground? When he levels its surface, does he not then sow the small black cumin, and afterward sow the wheat, the barley, and the one-seeded wheat in your borders? So you will be chastised by the judgment of your God and be gladdened by it. For the black cumin is not cleansed with harshness, nor will the wheel of a wagon roll over the cumin. But the black cumin is threshed with a stick, and the cumin will be eaten with bread. For I will not be angry with you forever, nor will the voice of my bitterness trample you underfoot. These signs came forth from the Lord of hosts. Take counsel, exalt vain comfort. So what's that all talking about? Well, this example is, right, if you're a farmer, you don't just go out and plow all day, right? It's not just like, well, work, right? You have a plan, right? You have a plan. You prepare the seed and then you plow, right? You plant one crop and then another crop and then another crop, right? You cycle the crops. You have a plan, and these things take place. These things take place in order, right? So Isaiah is saying, God is preparing a harvest from the whole earth. All these things don't happen at once. You don't see them all happening at once. Right? But they happen and they unfold the way God does them as He has planned them out to bring about that harvest in the end. Right? And so there are periods of suffering. There are periods of gladness. There are periods of judgment, right, that you're going to go through. But in every one of those, don't sit there and think, well, God is just judgment. Right? Or God is just blessings. Or right, God is just suffering. Right? All of these things are part of His plan to bring forth the harvest season. And that's true of the whole earth. That's true about us as people in our lives. Right? God has a plan, right, that St. Paul says is to prosper us and not to harm us. Right? But at any given point, we don't necessarily see that whole plan. Right? Especially we're in a period where we're under God's discipline, say, or where we're suffering, or where God seems far away. We think, oh, this is it. This is just how God is. Right? Because we don't know the whole picture of what He's doing, of how carefully He's working with us to mold us and shape us into the person we need to be. Right at the end of the day.
That's like a stonemason or an artist that's chipping on the stone and getting ready to make a face. He chips a little at a time until he gets it to where he wants it to be. Then he can put the arm, the face, and then go all the way down. Same thing with human.
He doesn't just sit there and hammer all day.
If you hammer it, you don't break it.
Yeah, you end up with nothing. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the image here. That's the image here that he's reminding, because these things that he's talking about taking place, as we just said, they're going to find, a lot of them are going to find their fulfillment 700 years later. Right? They're full fulfillment 700 years later. And so he's saying, don't make the mistake of not seeing the big picture. Right? Not seeing the big picture. That's what motivates a lot of prophecy. Because as we said, prophecy and apocalyptic, the purpose is not so much to predict the future as to give the big picture. Right? The whole picture from beginning and end, to give God's perspective on it. You see the same thing in the book of Revelation. St. John, people are being persecuted, they're being killed every day, they're being tortured and murdered for being Christians. These people are seeing their family, their friends, their loved ones die for professing Christ. Right? And the way St. John is going to comfort them is by showing them the big picture. Right? Because most of them were not going to live, none of them were going to live on this earth that St. John originally wrote to. None of them were going to live to see Constantine and Christianity become legal. Their whole lives they spent being persecuted for being Christians, from beginning to end. But St. John gives us the big picture. This little slice isn't all there is. Right? God has a plan and He's bringing about something wonderful. You're here at this point in it. That isn't very pleasant. It involves a lot of suffering. But there's a big picture. And so that's what Isaiah is doing here. Okay. So chapter 29. Woe to the city of Ariel against which David waged war. Gather fruits year by year, for you will eat with Moab. For I will afflict Ariel, and her strength and wealth will be mine. I will encircle you as David did, and I will put a barricade around you and place towers around you. Your words will be humbled to the earth, and your words will sink into the earth. Your speech shall be like those calling out of the ground, and your voice weakened to the ground. Moreover, the wealth of the ungodly shall be like the dust of a wheel, and like dirt carried away. It shall be as though in an instant and suddenly from the Lord of hosts, for there will be a visitation with thunder and earthquake and a great noise, and a sudden blast of wind and a devouring flame of fire. The wealth of all the nations, as many as fought against Ariel, and all who wage war against Jerusalem, and all who gather against her and afflict her, shall be as one who dreams in the night. They shall be like those who eat and drink in a dream. And when they awake, their dream was useless. And as a thirsty man dreams, as if he is drinking, but is still thirsty, when he wakes, and his soul hoped in vain. So will be the wealth of all the nations that fought against Mount Sinai. So Ariel is one of Jerusalem's enemies, and has been historically, right? It goes all the way back to King David, right? It is still now in the time of Hezekiah. And so it's being used as sort of an example.
I thought it says in the study Bible, Gabriel is Jews.
No, because as you can see, it's talking about David fighting against Ariel. No, it's a different city, and it represents all of Jerusalem's enemies, right? And so it and everyone else, right, who chooses to fight against God and His people, it's talking about their wealth and their power. Wealth and power in this world. What is it like? Well, it's like a dream. Right? I don't know if you've ever had a dream where you had like a really good dream where something really cool happened. Right? Say you won $1 million. Right? Suddenly you were rich. Suddenly you were in the movies or something. Right? And then you wake up and you're kind of like, darn. You know? I was going with that for a while, right? That's what it's like, right? They're saying it's like, somebody who's thirsty, and you have a dream that you're drinking a nice cool glass of water, but then you wake up and you're still thirsty. Right? So all the wealth and the riches and power in this world, right, are like that. They're like a dream, right? You think there's something, right? And for a little while, you could feel really, really good about yourself because you've got so much wealth and power and you've accumulated all these things. But then you wake up. Right? Or in this case, you die. Right? And all of a sudden, it's all gone. Like it was never there in the first place. It's an illusion. It's not real. Verse 9, faint and be amazed, be overpowered, not with strong drink nor with wine. For the Lord made you drink a spirit of deep sleep, and He shall close their eyes and the eyes of their prophets and rulers who see secret things. All these things shall be to you as the words of this sealed book, which if they should give to a learned man, saying, read this, that he will say, I cannot read this, for it is sealed. This book shall also be placed in the hands of an unlearned man, and one shall say to him, read this. Then he will say, I do not understand writings. And so he's saying, this is again part of that picture of them not seeing. Right? We already saw that they would see, and then they become jealous of this other untaught people who are coming to God. This is again referring to this book, not just Isaiah. It's referring to Isaiah's prophecies, but all the prophets. Right? All the prophets from Moses on who have come to them. Right? All is one book saying, you can take this book, you can take these prophecies, you can take all these things I've told them, you can hand them to the wisest man you can find. Right? You look at it and be like, I don't know what this says. Right? I can't read this. Right? Because they don't understand. They're so far alienated from God that they can't see it when it's right in front of them. They can't hear it when it's spoken to them. Verse 13, so the Lord said, these people draw near to me and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And they worship me in vain, teaching the commandments and doctrines of men. So they're still coming to worship services. Right? They're still showing up, and they're still with their mouth. Right? It's paying homage to me. Right? But their heart is someplace totally different. Someplace totally different. Right.
That's one of the favorite Bible verses.
And so they worship me in vain, teaching the commandments and doctrines of men. Right, because what God has taught to them, right, is closed off from them. Because their heart is so far from them, they can't understand it. So what do they have left to argue about and discuss and teach? What they themselves have come up with. Right? So they play their own games, right? Theological games, scholarly games with each other. You know, philosophizing and arguing and going back and forth, but it amounts to nothing. Right? Because it's disconnected from the truth.
Actually, this is usually the verse that quotes to you. You follow the commandments and doctrines of men, you go to church, but you don't really believe in Christ.
Well,
Learning with their lips, but their heart is far from it.
that's easy to say. You could say that, right? But you can say that to anyone. Tell them to prove it. I mean, I could say the same thing to them. I could say they're following the doctrines of John Calvin, who was a man. Or Martin Luther, who was a man. You can throw that back and forth. But what it's saying, what the text is saying, right, is that while these people continue to say they believe in Yahweh, they follow Yahweh, He's their God, they're even going to worship Him, right? Their heart is far away and somewhere else. And because of that, they can't understand the things of God at all. And so they're just playing games, essentially, right? Following commands, instructions of men, meaning they're following all the rules and going through all the motions, right? But it doesn't amount to anything. Worship is in vain. Worship is empty because they don't know God at all. Right? So unless a person who quotes this at you is prepared to judge your heart, which I at least would hesitate to do, you know, they aren't really justified in quoting it to me. Right. But this is another one of those verses that, as a priest, you really don't want to quote much, because it's another one of those verses that's saying, don't go through the motions. If you don't really believe, don't go to church. You know? But if you say that, attendance might go down. So we don't say that too much. Don't go through the motions. It's fine. But that's what God is saying. God is saying going through the motions has zero value. If you don't believe in your heart, if you don't care about these things, if you aren't serious, then showing up and parroting the phrases, going through the motions, has zero value. Doesn't get you anywhere. So verse 14, therefore behold. So here we have a therefore. See, these therefores are showing this is the consequence. Right? He says what they've done. First he talks about how they made a covenant with death, right, and wickedness. And he says because of what you've chosen to do, right, therefore this is what's going to happen. Right? Same thing here. Right? Because this is true, because your heart is far from me, you're going through the motions, but you don't know any of the things of God because you're not really interested. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to remove this people, and I shall remove them. I shall destroy the wisdom of the wise and hide the understanding of the intelligent. Woe to those who deepen their counsel, but not through the Lord. Woe to those who take counsel in secret and whose works are in darkness. They say, who sees us? And who knows us or what we do? So, this is obvious. There's these people who think they've sort of outsmarted God, right? Nobody knows. Nobody's ever going to know what I did or thought. Or, I got away with it. Right? These people are cursed. These people are damned because God knows exactly what they did. Verse 16, shall you not be considered as the clay of the potter? Shall what is molded of clay say to him who molded it, you did not create me? Or shall the work say to him who made it, you did not make me wisely?
Sometimes that's how I God, why did you create me this way? You've done a better job.
Well, this is the point, right? He's saying, look, I made you. I know you. You're not getting away with anything. I know who you really are. You're not fooling.
Well, Genesis, Adam, when God called his name and he said, where art thou? You remember what Adam's reply was? I hid myself among the leaves, who have told you.
Yeah.
God already knew he sinned. He
Yeah.
already sinned it.
Yeah, God already knew. And then of course he goes and he doesn't say, oh yeah, I did what you told me not to do. It's this woman you put here. This woman you put here with me.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's the, did you make me wisely?
Right, same thing.
Oh, see, God, that was a bad move making this woman. You see, she got me in trouble. Right?
What's the woman do? What was her plot now?
Well, it was the snake. It was a bad move having the snake around, God, because yeah. But so it's that same thing. This is the same kind of question, right? God comes in judgment, and they say, "Well, boy, you messed up when you made me this way," right? Try to throw it back at him. Is it not yet a very little while until Lebanon shall be changed like Mount Carmel, and Mount Carmel be considered a forest? In that day the deaf shall hear the words of the book, and the eyes of those in darkness and in a fog shall see. The poor also shall rejoice exceedingly in gladness because of the Lord, and the hopeless among men shall be filled with gladness. The lawless man has come to an end, and the arrogant man has perished. Those who act lawlessly in malice are utterly destroyed, as well as those who cause men to sin in word. They shall make all who condemn at the gates an offense, because they turned aside the righteous man with wrongdoing. Therefore the Lord says this concerning the house of Jacob, whom he set apart out of Abraham. Now Jacob shall not be ashamed, nor shall Israel now change his countenance. But when their children see my works, they shall sanctify my name for my sake. They will sanctify the Holy One of Jacob and fear the God of Israel. And those who erred in spirit shall know understanding, and those who complained will learn to obey. And the stammering tongues shall learn to speak peace. So, what he's saying here is that in the end, again we have this image of there being this Israel that is purified, right? Because all the lawless men, right, all the wicked have ceased, right? They're done. They're gone. And so, the Jacob that we have left, that's made holy, is the one that sanctifies the Holy One of Jacob and fears the God of Israel. And then, those who erred in spirit will know understanding. Right? Then they will be able to understand. Right? Then they will be able to understand. And so this is a big part of what St. Paul is talking about in a few places. A big obvious one is, again, back in Romans 9, because he uses this same potter and clay example. When he talks about why a whole bunch of people who are descendants of Abraham through Jacob, right, didn't believe in Christ. Right? He refers back to this passage. They didn't believe in Christ. Why? Well, because they were so caught up in their own wisdom, right? And their heart was far from God, and so they couldn't understand the things that he was telling them. They couldn't understand the prophets. Couldn't understand the Torah, the law, because those were pointing them at Christ. Right? They couldn't understand it because their hearts were wicked and far from God. So they ended up being cut off. Right? Meanwhile, a whole bunch of Gentiles, right, who hadn't received all those promises, who are the untaught people, right, who are ignorant over here, now have come to believe in Christ, right, and have been grafted in. And when he says, well, what shall we say is God unjust, he refers right back to this potter and clay example. Right back to this potter and clay example. But also this piece at the end, it's once we believe that we begin to understand. It doesn't work the other way. It doesn't work the other way. Okay? Because we, especially as modern people, have a very materialistic sense of what knowing something means. Right? We think about knowing in terms of science, right? Logic, mathematics, right? So we want to come up with I want to prove that God exists, right? Go with proofs that God exists. Or we want to come up with all these rational means, right? The problem is that even if you could do that, even if I could fill this chalkboard with math, and somehow at the end of all that math, you came up with God exists, right? Would that have the power to save anybody? Would that God I just proved exists have anything to do with Jesus Christ? Right? Because the point is we can only really understand God. Because God is a person. In fact, God's three persons. But we can only understand him the way we come to understand a person. And that's to know them. Right? I cannot reduce a person to a set of equations. I can reduce your body to a set of equations and chemical interactions. But who you are as a person, your soul, your interior life, your consciousness, I can't do equations and come up with that. Okay? And you could ask any scientists. I was just listening to one on NPR last night who was talking about how they've worked out the whole story of the universe, from the Big Bang to the end. And he said, there's still a couple of holes in the story that we can't explain, and one of them's human consciousness. Well, there you go. Can't explain your soul with math and science. Okay? I can't take you as a person and reduce you to math. God is a person. The only way to come to understand God is to come to know him personally. You can only do that. You can only do that through faith. You can't do it from outside. You can't do it from some outside objective position where, well, if I get an explanation and all of this makes sense to me, then I'll accept that Christianity is true. That's not how it works. Right? That's not how it works. For us, the truth is Jesus Christ. So the truth is a person. So if you want to know the truth, you have to get to know a person. Okay. So that's the only way it works. And that's what Isaiah is pointing to here. They don't know God. They can sit and talk about God for hours, but they don't know him. Right? Same way I could talk about Alexander the Great for hours, trust me. I'll bore you to tears. but right? But I don't know him. I never knew him. I can't tell you what his laugh sounded like. I can't tell you the look he got in his eye when he saw his horse that he loved and named 5 cities after. Right? I don't know him as a person. I know a lot of things about him. Same thing with all kinds of people in history. Right? That's not enough with God. That doesn't do anything for you. That's vain, as it says. Right? What counts is knowing God, not knowing things about him. Getting to know him yourself. And so that's where Isaiah is going with this. That's what these people, the people who make it, this remnant, are going to be the ones who come to know God. And most of them, the vast majority of them, aren't going to be the kings and the prophets and the priests. Right? They're going to be a bunch of peasants. A bunch of literally uneducated, illiterate peasants. Right? But who have come to know God.
When you talk about just going through the motions, it's worthless. But what if you do believe? Because sometimes you're there and you really are just kind of going through the motions and just sort of stuff. And I mean, I find if I have to miss church for something, like if I'm in the Greek church and I'm distracted because I'm trying to keep the 2-year-old kind of quiet and contained, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what happened with the Lord's Prayer? But if I don't go at all, I start feeling, and then when I come back, it's been it would have been 2 weeks, I felt really adrift. So sometimes I think just maybe going through the motions helps.
Well, remember what the man with the epileptic son said to Jesus? He said, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Right? like everything else about us, our faith is never perfect. Right? And so we can't expect that of ourselves. Right? There's a struggle there. And you're married, so I'll use this as an example. I'll use this as an example. Okay? When you're married, right? For those of you who aren't married, I hope I'm not destroying any beautiful illusions. But you don't spend every moment of every day just consumed with the puppy love you had when you first met, right? Sometimes you're not feeling it, right? You know, that doesn't mean you don't love your spouse anymore. Doesn't mean you stopped loving your spouse, right? Just because at that moment you're not gushing with, you know, romantic hearts and flowers, right? You still love them. Right? You're still in that relationship, right? You're still just as committed as you always were. Just for that moment, you're not feeling it. And so I don't call what you do in that state, right? When you don't feel like it, but you go and take the trash out anyway without being asked, right? Or you know, you cook something they like for dinner, even though again you're not feeling right. I don't call that going through the motions, right? I think that's part of commitment. And part of faith, right, is that, you know, emotions come and go. That kind of stuff comes and goes. Right? But your dedication needs to be unwavering. Right? Your love needs to be unwavering. So there are days when I'm feeling really spiritual and close to God. Right? And there are days and moments and days and parts of days where I'm not really feeling it. Where he seems far off, or where I'm just consumed with so much other stuff, you know. But hopefully, my love for God, regardless of where my feelings are, my love for God is a constant through there, or is growing, even through those times where it feels, where I'm not feeling it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
What I'm saying?
I guess I just...
I'm saying I don't consider that going. I consider going through the motions to be, well, to continue the example, like if you were in an arranged marriage, right? And you really didn't love the person, right? But you lived with them anyway because society sort of forced you to, right? That's what I would call going through the motions, right? So, in this case, you know, to use a more modern example to be similar to ancient Israel, right? I used to live in East Texas. In East Texas, everyone goes to church. Okay? And there's a church for everyone. Doesn't matter, you know, all the strippers at the strip club go to church every Sunday. Right? It doesn't matter what you do for a living, right? Everybody goes to church because society says you go to church on Sunday. The society is Christian. It just sort of tells you to do that. So in that kind of structure, you have people going through the motions. You have people who don't give a lick right, about the Bible or Christianity or anything else. Or you also have people who are in that environment who are going to church, to a particular church in order to make business connections. Right? And again, they don't care a lick about God. They don't care a lick about. They're there because they need to. You know, they're going to serve on the board with Bob and Phil, and Bob owns the car dealership, and Phil owns, right? And they need to network.
This is the true definition of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
That's
Honoring with your mouths and your heart is
because
far.
of a person. So I hear a lot of people in the church saying, "Gee, I just feel like a hypocrite because, like you say, man, I'm just going through the motion." No, you're not a hypocrite as long as you're real. I mean, you don't want to ever get to that point where you would be a hypocrite by saying, I just don't care. I mean, I don't believe a thing about this, and I'm just doing it. But I don't believe any of this. That's
Right. That
would be hypocrisy.
Yeah. So it's not
Still struggling.
again
Still
our faith
struggling.
being defective and our love being defective, right? But us struggling and doing our best. That's not what this is talking about.
Struggling, coming back.
Right. This is talking about someone who's not struggling,
Right.
who doesn't care,
I could care less.
but is going through the motions for some other reason, right? To make themselves look good, to fit in with going to do
The
whatever.
Pharisee, for one example, the pride.
Yeah, the Pharisees.
The pride they had.
Yeah.
To be looked at by other people as holy, be respected, right?
I mean, if they would come to my house, they would never invite me to their house, because I'm a poor man anyway. If I went to their house, they would have me another change garment to use while I'm eating with them. They would.
Yeah,
I mean, they would never come to my house because I don't have very much.
yeah. But yeah, the Pharisees also, but that's what it's talking about. It's not talking about, you know, and that's why I use the example of marriage, because I love for our spouses to affect them too. Right? But we're not going through the motions unless the love isn't there. Right? So that's okay. So I think this is probably a good place to stop. As we went a little long.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Getting back to the beginning of the class.
You really want to watch that show, do you?
Well, I want to ask this question. Are we looking back to